So now that we've identified the type of evaluation that we want to use and the key evaluation objectives and questions, we're going to talk a little bit about managing the evaluation design process, which is a really important role that USAID plays. So that starts with developing a scope of work for the evaluation. That should include specifying whether or not this is a performance or an impact evaluation, and should also be as explicit as possible about the project that's being evaluated and the specific questions and outcomes we want to measure. We also see that setting minimum standards in terms of the rigor of the evaluation in the scope of work is helpful in making sure that the evaluation is designed in a way to answer specific questions. For example, if we want to understand impacts on women, we need to make sure that there's enough women in the sample of households that are interviewed to rigorously quantify the impacts on women. It's also important to make sure that the evaluation team includes country and subject matter experts. These evaluations and research in general is only as good and as rigorous as the team of people and their collective knowledge that went into designing it. So if you really want to understand the impact of your program, you really need to have people that understand the program, the country context, and ideally the types of people and types of activities that you're working with. That might require hiring, an Ethiopian example, a pastoralist, a researcher who has pastoral experience and understands the ways that these communities govern their land and resource rights. If you have particular questions about women, it might also include a gender specialist, and that could be somebody who has global gender expertise, but ideally it would be somebody who understands gender in the context of where your particular project is taking place. The next key thing, once the scope of work has been issued, the project has been awarded for the evaluation, is really helping the evaluation team understand what the treatment is and who the beneficiaries are. So at a minimum, we need to share with our evaluation team the project design and sort of background documents that explain the program's theory of change, the scope of work, what the project will do, that might be the work plans, and also monitoring and evaluation plan if there is one. And again, this will help identify what the specific activities are that we think will lead to the development outcomes we want to measure, but also what are the other data sources that the evaluation can rely on. A good monitoring and evaluation plan with good monitoring indicators at the project level should be able to feed data into the evaluation to help us understand why we're seeing particular changes. Typically, this will require organizing a number of meetings with the implementer and the evaluation team to clarify detailed questions that maybe the evaluation team hasn't been able to pick up from the written documents. And it's often helpful for USAID to be in those conversations to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So this brings me to the next big piece, which is USAID's most important role in this phase, which is coordinating between the implementer and the evaluation team. A number of our implementing partners have never been through an evaluation, or at least an impact evaluation, before. And so one of the things that we found is really important up front is just to make sure that everybody is on the same page about the objectives of the evaluation process, and what that means for the implementer and their implementation timeline. And that's things as basic as making sure that the specific activities that we seek to measure in the implementation don't start until after the evaluation team has been able to collect baseline data. Another thing that USAID can help do is identify ways to make the project more amenable to evaluation. So we talked a little bit earlier on about the importance of having a flexible program design and rollout. The case in the Ethiopia Land Project, it's not possible to test different activities in different communities. We really want to test a package of interventions. But maybe we can roll out that package at different stages in different communities, and then essentially you can compare those communities to each other and have a better sense of what the impact of that package of interventions is. And having USAID mediate sort of between what is best for the evaluation in terms of the most rigorous design for the evaluation and what's best for the development project and the implementation process is really important, because ultimately it's up to the evaluation firm to design the most rigorous evaluation possible, and it's up to the implementing partner to design and implement the most rigorous project possible. And so USAID needs to make the call when particular design decisions, either for the evaluation or the implementation, have implications that would compromise either the evaluation or the implementation, to make that call. Are we going to go with what's best for the evaluation in this case, what's best with the implementation? And one thing I want to highlight here is that we found that the process of designing impact evaluations actually makes our programming better. And in fact, the World Bank has just done research looking at their portfolio that found that projects that had impact evaluations consistently delivered more on schedule and more of their targeted performance indicators than projects that didn't have impact evaluations. So I think this process, although it does require significant time and effort on behalf of all of the parties involved, is really important for making sure that we have projects that are designed to achieve the development outcomes that we expect them to achieve, and that those outcomes are achieved. So when we're evaluating land programs, there are some special design considerations that are unique to land and, I would say, governance interventions more broadly. The first of these we've talked about a little bit already, which is figuring out what it is that actually leads to the desired changes in development outcomes. So typically we have an intervention or a package of interventions like customary land demarcation, land use planning, supporting customary land governance entities. And it's our expectation that those interventions will lead to certain changes in the way that people perceive the fairness of land allocation, for example, or the likelihood that somebody will take their land from them. It's our hope that those changes in perceptions will lead to changes in behavior. So if people feel less worried that they're going to lose their land 5 years or 10 years down the road, they might be more likely to plant a tree that takes 5 to 10 years to show benefits for them. And ultimately, our hope is that by planting that tree and changing the way that they manage their land, they will achieve higher productivity, higher income, more assets. So understanding, again, that theory of change is really important, and is sometimes a little bit difficult and messy in the context of land interventions. I mean, there are widely differing opinions about the extent to which it's an actual piece of paper being delivered to an individual or a household or a community that leads to those changes in perceptions of tenure security, or if it's just a process of having all of your neighbors around your boundaries agree that these are your boundaries with you in the field and maybe with a local official, that leads to you believing that your tenure is secure. So it's not quite as simple, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the next bullet, is a vaccine. You know when someone's received a vaccine. It's a little bit more difficult, looking at the next bullet, to define when a beneficiary has been treated. And sometimes, as I mentioned, we have packages of interventions that are required. So it's not just about the delivery of a paper certificate, it's about the whole process of involving the neighbors in discussing the boundaries, getting the government to certify those boundaries, creating a registry that has a record of the boundaries of your plot, and then issuing a paper certificate to you. And that whole package of governance interventions might be what we actually think leads to this change in perception and behavior and impact. And then finally, what are the desired development outcomes? So again, there are, as you've heard through many of these other modules in this massive open online course, there are multiple dimensions of tenure security and governance. And this isn't just about titling or even just about the issuance of any particular piece of paper that says these are your rights. Tenure security, we think, includes the freedom from fear of having your land be encroached upon or expropriated, the freedom to use your land as you see fit, subject to perhaps some good governance rules that your community has set, like not letting your cattle graze on your neighbor's trees. And governance similarly is quite multifaceted. It includes the way people make decisions about land allocation, about land use. It includes the way that those decisions and rules are enforced and sanctioned in case they're broken. So there's a lot of outcomes that we might expect to see just in terms of tenure security and land governance. But then there's also, these longer term changes that we're hoping to see. And, some perceptions and behavior changes you might see in the short term, but big processes like creating representative democratic community governance entities that incorporate women and youth and minorities probably is going to take a long time. and probably won't be able to be measured in the 5 years that we typically have a programming cycle, let alone having those governance changes lead to changes in assets and productivity at the household level. So it's really important to think when you're designing an evaluation of a land project, what are the dimensions of tenure security that are most relevant and governance in your context? And what are the short-term, medium-term, long-term development outcomes that you can reasonably expect to measure?